This is another easy jazz piano tutorials video, and it is kind of a prequel to the jazz piano bass lines video I did. I had a question from a friend, a viewer, wanted to know a little more or perhaps a little less about how to play jazz bass lines on the piano. And my last video was a little more advanced because it already assumed that you knew how to play a basic bass line, how to improvise a basic bass line on the piano, and I added the concept of triplets. That's a bit of an advanced concept, so I thought I would take the request of my friend who asked for a bit more of a basic approach to playing bass lines on the piano. I will also say that in order to get the best understanding of how to play a bass line on the piano in a jazz context, you want to understand the jazz blues form. So this video is going to assume that you already understand the jazz blues form. If you do not, message me on Facebook or Instagram or comment on this YouTube video and I will get back to you on exactly what that is, or suggest it and I may actually make a video around what the jazz blues form actually is, if I get enough requests. But until then, this video assumes that you already know what the jazz blues form is and you're already acquainted with it. You can just treat this video, again, as a prerequisite, a prequel to the last jazz bass lines video I did. This one is for piano players, non-piano players, musicians in general. Hope you enjoy. Okay, so to start out with bass lines, how to learn how to construct a good bass line, the best way, in my opinion, is to start with the blues. And so we're going to start, as I mentioned in the intro, with the blues jazz form. Again, I'm going to assume you're already familiar with the blues jazz form. When we start working bass lines, the first thing that we want to consider is we really want to have strong chord tones on beats 1 and 3. And what I mean by strong chord tones are the 1, the 3, the 5, and the flat 7. And whatever key you're in the F blues, whether you're in F7, B flat 7, or C7, the dominant, you want to think of those 1, 3, 5, and flat 7 chord tones. And by the way, when I say key, harmony, chord, or mode, I'm pretty much using those terms interchangeably. So that's the first thing. You want those strong chord tones on beats 1 and 3 most of the time. Now you can have them on 2 and 4, and for our purposes here, the strongest beats are beats 1 and 3. And you can have strong beats on 2 and 4 in jazz, but that's kind of another thing. So we're just going to focus on strong beats 1 and 3. That's the first thing to know. The second thing that you want to know is that you really want to play the root as soon as the harmony changes. So as soon as the harmony changes to a new chord, you want to accentuate that chord by bringing out the bass line. So we're starting on F7. Now the very next chord of the blues, F blues, is going to be B flat 7. And we want to bring that bass line out as soon as that B flat comes. Back to the 1, 2, 5 to the 4, and so on. So you really want to bring out that bass as soon as the harmony changes, at least in the beginning stages of when you're first learning this, to really make it clear to yourself and clear to the audience. And the third point is we want to approach the roots from above or from below by either half or whole step. So what that means is that, again, we're starting in F. Now the next chord of the F blues is B flat. Now we can approach B flat either from above, like I just did there, so or we can approach it from below. Sorry. So in both of those examples, I approached by whole step. We can also approach by half step. So that would look like this, starting from the very top of the form, F7, above. So there I approached B flat from above by a half step. Now I'm going to approach it from below. This is how I approach it from below by half step. So those are the first 3 points that you really want to drill and make sure you understand. Strong chord tones on beats 1 and 3, playing the roots as soon as the harmony changes, and being able to approach the next root as it comes along from a half step or a whole step, from above or from below. Now, once you understand those 3 things, you're really well on your way to constructing a great sounding bass line. So now that we have those 3 points, I want to move on to what I call the building blocks of badass bass lines. All right, so the first, and there's really 2. There's really only 2 of those. It's kind of like the brick and mortar of building a great bass line. And the first one is stepwise motion. Okay, so we want to have stepwise motion, which means moving up or down by step, almost like we're walking up or down a scale. In this case, F7. It could be F Lydian with that flat 7, or the dominant with the sharp 4, however you want to think of it, or flat 7. Or we could start from we could go down also. We could walk down by step. Okay, so really either direction by step. All right, the next thing that we want to do, or the other part of that, the other building block of our badass bass line, is the strong chord tones, 1, 3, 5, and 7. And we want to use those interchangeably, or just as much as we do stepwise. So the best bass line that we're going to end up building is going to be a combination of both stepwise motion and strong chord tones, 1, 3, 5, and 7. And that is really, in the end, going to be up to you, the player of the bass line, how you want to partition your bass line between the stepwise motion and the strong chord tones. So I'll give you an example. We can start out with stepwise and then go to strong chord tones, and that would look like something like this, starting from the top of the form. Stepwise, 1, 3, 5. Now back to stepwise. Okay, so now notice right there, as I was going to the 4, I was playing a 2-5 to the 4. And the 2-5 to the 4, in this case C minor 7 to F7 to B flat 7. There's only 4 beats there, and you really, it's really easy to know what to do there. Basically, you're playing a 2-5, again, a 2-5 to the B flat. You're starting on the root. Now on beat 2, you know that you're going to an F7, so you can lead to that F7 either from a whole step or a half step above or below. And I usually do a half step, but you can do a whole step too. Okay, so that's something to experiment with whenever you have a 2-5 in the jazz blues form. Just try sticking in those approach notes. That's what they're called, half step or whole step approach notes. And you won't have to think so much about your note choices in those short measures where you just have a 2-5 leading to the next chord. Okay, so back to our building blocks of badass bass lines. So I just gave you an example of starting stepwise and then going to strong chord tones. Now I'm going to start with strong chord tones and do stepwise, starting from the top of the form. Okay, now I did a little bit of stepwise motion there, walking down chromatically to the 4. But if I were to extend the strong chord tone motion, it would be more something like this. Now, for all intents and purposes, that's not what we're aiming to do at this point, because I want to really drive home the approaching the next harmony from above or below. So whenever you have a skip like that, right before the downbeat of the next chord, like in that case it was the E flat skipping down to the 4, skipping down to the B flat, that's not really what we're aiming for when we're just learning how to construct a good bass line. So watch out for that. And again, that's why you want a mix of strong chord tones 1, 3, 5, and 7 with the stepwise motion for your ideal badass bass line. Okay, so let's go back to our other example where we're starting with 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then throwing in stepwise motion. If I were teaching this to a beginner bass line player, which I am, I would just say either walk down to the B flat or approach the B flat from below. So there's all kinds of possibilities. And again, I really encourage you to experiment with this and do all kinds of the different approach tones, half step, whole step, above, below, you know, and just experiment with it as much as you can so that you end up creating a bass line that feels good to you. And that's really the most important thing, is to create a bass line that feels good. So I'm going to play the first few bars of an F blues and do my best to demonstrate everything that I've laid out so far. Here we go. So I'm going to start with, I guess I'll just start with strong chord tones, and then I'll work in stepwise motion, go back to strong chord tones, and kind of go back and forth between those two, which is really what a good bass line should do anyway. Notice the approaching from above or below. Okay, now you can see I have a couple things going on here, multitasking, which is typical, but you can see I have both my chordy app up and also the F Blues Bass Line Worksheet. So I would encourage that you download this F Blues worksheet and just make up your own bass line using the principles that I just laid out. It's really satisfying, actually, to be able to just write out your own bass line, so you can really absorb these things and actually implement the tools that are at your disposal to see what creative decisions that you would make, and to really just learn the process, which actually, the more that you do this, the more you play bass lines and experiment, it becomes a lot easier. Okay, so that being said, I'm gonna take the next couple of minutes and just demonstrate through the entire blues jazz form what a good bass line would look like, or could possibly, how a good bass line could possibly be constructed using all these principles. So we'll start from the top of the form. We've got F7. Now I usually will start, and again, once you do this, the more you do this, you'll start building habits, and you'll start walking your bass lines in you'll have certain parts of the form where you do the same type of things almost every time. It will just be kind of second nature, which is kind of what we're going for. So I usually walk bass lines starting like with the blues, for example. I usually start with the strong chord tones, 1, 3, 5, and then approaching the B flat, and then back to 1, 3, 5, something like that maybe, or 1, 3, 5. And then walking up to the F there. So that's something that I tend to kind of just do without thinking a lot of the time when I'm walking an F bass line, or really any blues. But you don't have to do it that way. You can start stepwise, and you can even start stepwise walking from coming down stepwise. So almost like you're playing an F7 scale. Okay, so that was good because it felt good, and you ended up on F, which is about as strong a chord tone as you can on the downbeat of measure 3, and it felt good. And that's really the object here, is we want our bass line to feel good. Okay, so I'm going to go through measure by measure here. So let's say we'll start stepwise. Now again, I'm combining stepwise motion with strong chord tones 1, 3, 5, and 7. You can't have either one, and you wouldn't want either one of those building blocks by itself through an entire bass line, because it just wouldn't sound musical. Although it could be a very good exercise to try to walk an entire bass line just using one of those building blocks, either the stepwise motion or the 1, 3, 5, 7. So that might be a good exercise. I might do another video on that. But starting from the first bar of the F blues, okay, here we go. Let's just say we want to start with stepwise motion, walking down. Okay, here we go. Bar 1. Oops. Okay, bar 2, B flat 7. Let's just continue to walk down to our F7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Okay, now let's switch to strong chord tones. 1, 3, 5. 1, 3, 5. Okay, now we're doing a 2, 5 to the 4. Okay, so there I did just what I explained earlier, starting on the root, and then on beat 2, approaching the next harmony, which is F7. That time I approached it from a whole step above, and then a half step, approaching B flat from a half step above. Okay, so really just knowing that one rule will give you the right notes that you want. Okay, so the next measure, B flat 7, 4. Okay, passing diminished, B diminished 7. Now we're on to B natural here. This is a B diminished 7 chord. We can do strong chord tones, which would be outlining the B diminished chord. Da, da, da. B, D, F, A flat. Or we could do stepwise. We could walk a diminished scale, if you're familiar with the diminished scale, whole half or half whole. I'll do whole half here. Oh, and that takes us right to F7. Now we could also go to C here, which is a common thing that some jazz players will do in this measure of the jazz blues form. They bring out the C because it's almost like the C is leading to the 2-5, the A minor 7 flat 5 to the D7, which ultimately leads to G minor 7. So if we wanted to do that, we could, if we wanted to walk the same type of thing with the B diminished 7, we could do like B, C sharp, D. Now, we could go up to E and then end up on C if that's what we're aiming for. But again, really consciously try to approach the next harmony from a half step or whole step. That rule, I believe, is so it's really going to help out a lot. And then of course later on, when you become more familiar with walking bass line, you can depart from that rule and approach. Don't worry about being so close with your approach intervallically. But for now, really just try to have the immediately preceding note from the next harmony be in either a half step or a whole step. So if we're walking a stepwise diminished thing here, B, C sharp, D, and we want to approach the C from a half step or a whole step, then we might just want to go back down to D flat and then end up on C. Or we might go back to B and then end up on C. Okay, there's really no wrong answer or right answer, just so long as you're keeping the approach by half step or whole step rule in mind for now. All right, so I might be overthinking this a little bit, but that's okay. It's all in a day's work. So I like to arpeggiate. I like to play strong chord tones on diminished chords. I just like the sound of that. Okay, now we're on F7. Now we're up to our A minor 7 flat 5. Okay, so that was a nice little walk up there to our A minor 7 flat 5. And now we're going to go A minor 7 flat 5 to D7 to our G minor 7. Now I usually like to walk up stepwise to my 5 and then continue that stepwise motion all the way back up to either the F7 or the A7. Now what we have here is a 1-6-2-5 turnaround. It can also be 3-6-2-5 turnaround, which means you can use this A7 instead of the F. So say that I wanted to use the A7. It's the same basic principle as before. We're just playing the root when the harmony appears, and then filling in beats 2 and 4 with approaching the next harmony half step or whole step above or below. How many times can I say that today? But no, for real, when you start applying these rules, you will find that constructing a bass line is actually quite easy. So I hope this has offered, I hope this has given you quite a lot of insight and a lot of practical tools that you can use to start to construct your own bass lines in your playing. And again, I would really encourage you to experiment with this as much as you can. Experiment with which chord tones do you want to use. You might not always want to land on the root of the chord when you get more familiar with this, you might start playing around and breaking some rules. You might not always want to land on the root when the chord appears. You might want to do another strong chord tone. And also you might decide later on, once you get familiar with this, you might decide to approach a harmony not by half step or by whole step, but you might just skip. You might do a skip, as I sort of pointed out earlier. This has been a somewhat quick and dirty tutorial on the basics, the building blocks of badass bass lines. I would encourage you to download the worksheet and create your own bass line. Experiment with the different methods of how you can make a bass line that sounds good and feels good to you. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, email me, or find me on social media, send me a direct message. But this has been a basic video on the building blocks of badass bass lines. A lot of B words there. In a future video, I might go over how to walk bass lines with standards rather than just a blues. That's a bit more, you might, depending on how you look at it, it might be a bit more challenging or a bit less challenging because the harmony in standards is less formulaic oftentimes than a blues. So thanks again for watching. Ask any questions, reach out to me. I also want to hear about your progress too. So I really do care about your progress in this field of improvising, learning how to improvise music, learning how to walk bass lines, learning how to be a better musician overall. So thank you again for your time. Thank you so much for being willing to learn. And I'm here, very easily reachable. I do hope to hear from you and to hear about your progress.